Now, Tony also revealed, I mean, this was wild, that Lou Thesz was on his AOL buddy list when he was 12 years old, and they used to talk wrestling together. He said one of the greatest champions ever in wrestling, and certainly one of the greatest figures in St. Louis, is Lou Thesz. I'm honored that I believe the wife of the late, great Lou Thesz, Mrs. Thesz, will be in attendance at WrestleDream. I had some correspondence with Charlie Thesz. I have so much respect for Lou's legacy when I was really young, and he wrote a book called Hooker. I was 12 years old, and I used to talk with Lou on AOL a lot, and he was very insightful. I learned a lot talking with him. Last night at WrestleDream, they had Lou's widow, Charlie, in the front row. And I'm looking and I'm like, Jesus, like, how old is this woman? Like, Lou Thesz would have been 109 years old if he was still alive. So I checked, and apparently there was a 30-year age gap between him and his wife. He was 57 when they met, and she was 26. I did not know this. I saw her, and I thought, hey, she's looking good for her age. Now, she also did an interview backstage where she said, unlike other old-timers, Lou would have loved what AEW is doing to perpetuate the heart of professional wrestling. The same Lou Thesz who once called WWF and WCW circus wrestling. I think he even said that about New Japan at one point. I mean, I know it's his wife and all. She knows him best, but I find it very hard to believe that if he believed that about those companies, that he would be so progressive about the AEW product. I don't think Lou Thesz would be tuning into Dynamite every single week. Let's just put it that way. But, you know, as crazy as it sounds, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Tony was actually corresponding with Lou Thesz. Mike Johnson says that Thesz was part of the old grandstand wrestling area on AOL, and I remember that well. And he said that Lou had a folder on there where he would answer fan questions. Now, I don't remember his folder, but there were definitely wrestlers that were on there. Like even with RSPW, right? Remember all the RSPW rewinds that I did? Going through different posts in that news group, I would come across posts from wrestlers that were on there as well. Like Mark Merrow was one of them. I think he's even admitted that he used to post on there. Yeah, he was very fan-friendly, and he would post, and he would ask questions and answer questions. And I know to prove that it was him once on TV, and this would have had to have been in WCW when he was doing the Johnny B. Bad gimmick, he wrote, "Hi, RSPW" on a Frisbee, and he flashed it on camera before he tossed it into the crowd. So all that to say, it's at least possible that he did interact with Lou Thesz. But WrestleDream was the usual marathon AEW pay-per-view, but I started it late, so I was able to cut through certain parts of it, some of the entrances and whatnot. That helped shave off a little bit of time for me. It also saw Darby Allin force Jon Moxley to say the words, "I quit." They closed the show with that match and not the AEW World Championship match with Hangman Page and Samoa Joe. And why did they do that? Because this feud dates back over a year. That match last night is the match where Tony Khan probably wanted Darby Allin to win the AEW World Championship and be the savior of this company against the Death Riders. And it goes back to the Owen Hart tournament and the final between Hangman Page and Will Ospreay. And you remember those reports that came out about Hangman pushing for Ospreay to win behind the scenes. And then Ospreay, no, Ospreay wants Hangman to win. And Tony Khan being undecided about who he wanted to go over in that match until very late in the game. And if those reports are to be believed, that tells me that he didn't really want to change the title at All In. That it almost didn't even matter to him who was in that spot. He made a late call, he went with Hangman, but he wasn't committed to either one of them being the one to beat Jon Moxley. But he recognized that on their biggest show of the year at Globe Life Field, in front of 21,000 people, stand corrected, he needed to give the fans a happy ending. And with Darby having just climbed the mountain, literally, it couldn't be him, so Hangman got the title instead. That's what that tells me. But you look at this run that Hangman has had so far, and it hasn't been very inspired. There's a reason for that. What Tony Khan really wanted was for Darby Allin to be the one to beat Jon Moxley for that title. And if he hadn't climbed Everest, he would have been. So instead, we've gotten this half-hearted Hangman run so far. And a main event last night, 1 year after Moxley beat Bryan Danielson to win the title, where if Tony had his way, Darby Allin would have won the championship. Thankfully, it didn't work out that way because I could not stomach another 3 months of Jon Moxley as champion beating other random challengers. But it sure felt like that match last night, had Tony gotten his way, that it would have been for the title, and it would have been the fall of the Death Riders. That's why it got the main event spot, because it was the blow-off. And it also featured the return of Sting. We got Old Man Sting making a cameo appearance with his magnificent goatee. So we got the usual good wrestling on the show. We had the Ops turning heel, seemingly, unless this ends up being some kind of tweener gimmick. They went heel on Hangman Page after his win over Samoa Joe, which gave them a reason to run it back between them at Full Gear next month, so it's not a one and done between the two of them, which is the way it looked like to me. And that's fine because nothing seems to matter until MJF comes back to cash in that contract, which I figured would be a world's end anyway. So what do you do between now and then? If you've got one more pay-per-view to do, you know what? Instead of starting another, random feud from scratch, let's just extend this out for one more match. Right? We know Hangman is not losing the title, at least until MJF comes back. And Mercedes Moné, she collected her 11th championship in comical fashion. And by the time you listen to this, she will likely have 12 belts because she's wrestling Jody Threat in Winnipeg Pro Wrestling tonight for their women's championship. It's one thing for her to win belts in these independent promotions. It helps the promotion sell some tickets, and then you hope that she's going to pay it back eventually by committing to come back for another date and drop the belt. But the title that she won on this show last night, just hilariously bad. Just hilariously bad. Now, the main show was 4.5 hours long. I could not possibly care any less about the pre-show. That brought it to 5.5 hours. But I did see the new Conglomeration Tron for their entrance and the new theme song that Mikey Ruckus composed. This is his homage to Beverly Hills 90210. I mean, that sound is unmistakable when you listen to that song. Their Tron video is done like the opening video of a sitcom. It's actually one of the better things I've seen them produce, honestly. That and the Darby Allin, Jon Moxley jail scene from Dynamite on Wednesday. That was tremendous. And also, I want to give a shout out to Zane Decker. I believe he was the one responsible for that great Hangman Page documentary they posted to their YouTube channel the other day. I think it's about half an hour long. That's a great piece of business that you should check out. Zane has done a lot of great work for the promotion over the years. But they tried something different here at the beginning. They let the last pre-show match overlap into the start of the pay-per-view. So they actually opened the pay-per-view with a match already in progress between FTR and Jet Speed, which is definitely a different way to open a pay-per-view. I don't see how that match specifically is going to lead to any late buys whatsoever, but if it does, then it may be something worth trying again in the future. You could try anything once. And if it works, you do it again. If it doesn't work, then you don't do it again. So, I mean, I didn't hate it. It was just a different way of going about opening the show. The pyro going off in the middle of the match as they're slugging it out, as the pay-per-view itself opened, that reminded me of some of those old Monday Nitro shows where they would shoot pyro off in the middle of a match when hour 1 would end and they were about to begin hour 2. And I forget who it was. They were in the middle of a match once. And I think it was Bam Bam Bigelow and someone. I forget who the opponent was. But they transition from hour 1 to hour 2, and they don't just shoot pyro off. There's pyro on the stage. There's pyro over the ring. They're shooting flames out of the fucking ring posts. And Bam Bam just has this confused look on his face, looking around what the hell is going on here? This guy's just trying to have a match. And it's like World War III broke out in the middle of it. But Jamie Hayter beat Tekla. This was technically the show opener. Not very often that we get a women's match on these pay-per-views with no titles on the line. There was nothing on the line. The only stipulation is that everyone was barred from ringside. And it was hard-hitting as you would expect from these two. Right? You got to build Jamie back up to where she could challenge for that world title again at some point. And we know that she's going to be leading the charge into the first women's Blood and Guts match next month. Queen Aminata came out after the match to celebrate with her. while Julia Hart and Sky Blue, they just stared angrily from the stage. I mean, that's 5 of the 10 women right there, that you figure are going to be in Blood and Guts, assuming it's 5-on-5. So this was good stuff. Jurassic Express beat the Young Bucks to win $500,000 cash in what ended up being an excellent match, as ridiculous as it was seeing Jack Perry, of all people, kicking out of a spike package pile driver into a BTE trigger. I mean, that was just ridiculous. And it was only the second match of the card to be doing all of these false finishes. But you just sort of expect it on these shows. I mean, you know what you're dealing with here. I love the Bucks opening Tron. It was a screen with a digital expense report / account balance, and it listed out all of their expenses. So suits and sneakers, pyro and music. It said party, $53,000, virtual reality, $100,000, casino, $97,000. Total expenses, $499,967. Current balance, $32. And then it said insufficient funds, transaction denied. And the robot voice repeated this over and over again.
Insufficient funds, transaction denied. Insufficient funds, transaction denied.
That was basically their entrance music as they made their way out. And the lower third on the screen read the $32.17 Bucks. They could really use this win. And I figured the Bucks were going to win here because what would be the point of Perry and the Dinosaur winning the money, right? But the one good thing about them losing here is that it keeps the broke buck stuff going a little bit longer. It's one of the more entertaining parts of the shows. So I don't mind them, dragging that out longer. But Jurassic Express wins it. I'm still not sold on Jack Perry being fully babyface. There's something very fishy about this whole thing. But they won, and it puts them right in the mix for the tag team titles. And all of a sudden, we've got a real division again. And I talked about this a few weeks ago. What was once their greatest asset, what was once their greatest strength in this company, really became one of their greatest weaknesses. And I blame a lot of that on the introduction of the trios titles. But now they've got Brodito, and they've got the Bucks, and they've got Jurassic Express back together. They're trying to get the Acclaim back together. They got the Hurt Syndicate, the Gates of Agony, Jet Speed, and FTR, and the Outrunners. Like, they've gotten it back to the place where it was 4 or 5 years ago. So Kenny Omega comes out to make the save for them after the match when the Callis family attacks. And the Bucks, they walked off, so they weren't even going to help. And Omega meets him in the aisle and said, well, if you're not going to help them, then I will. So he seems to have forgiven Jack Perry for his past sins. He was very skeptical of him a week ago, but all of a sudden now it's like they're best friends. And Omega would have been wrestling on the show with Kota Ibushi against the Callis family had Ibushi now broken his leg. We have the Hurt Syndicate putting the nail in the coffin of Ricochet and the Gates of Agony. They take the series 2 matches to 1, not counting the regular tag team match that they had where GOA won, which is already forgotten about. This was contested under Tornado rules, but doing a straight match like this, I mean, more or less a straight match, coming off of a street fight, was very backwards. I don't know, why we got the street fight and then they did this. But there was a cool spot where Shelton Benjamin German suplex Ricochet out of the ring. I mean, that looked pretty crazy. As a brawl, it was fine. Nothing terribly special, but it was fine. And the Hurt Syndicate now are the number 1 contenders for the trios titles. They're going to be getting a title match on Dynamite this Wednesday. Where they go with Ricochet and GOA now, I have no idea. But one thing I will tell you, Ricochet, even though now he's got his own posse, is colder than he was earlier this year coming out of that feud with Swerve Strickland. He's actually in a worse position now than he was before. Kyle Fletcher, he beat Mark Briscoe to retain the TNT Championship. No surprise there. Would have been way too soon for the title to come off of Fletcher. And they had a very good match. I didn't think they needed 25 minutes for it. On a show that was already bloated, they could have shaved even just 5 minutes off and kept it to 20, and that would have been sufficient. But it was still very good. Chris Statlander and Timeless Tony Storm, they got their one-on-one match, and the outcome was the same as it was for Tony at All Out. A win for Statlander, which she needed to cement the fact that her title win was not a fluke. This was a decisive win for Chris Statlander. And the crowd was quieter for a lot of it than you would want them to be, I think, because they didn't know who to cheer for, right? They like both women. But like the previous match, this was very good. And then out comes Mercedes 10 belts. And a dark cloud settles over Chris Statlander's head because you know what's coming. She comes out with all of the frat house geeks dancing at ringside holding her belts. She congratulated Stat on her win, but told the world champion to get the hell out of her ring. And in response to this, Chris Statlander obliged. Speaking of geeks. Now, she did come back out after the match was over, the following match, to go after Mercedes, but still, your world champion backing down like that did not do her any favors. So we had Ultimo Monet. That's the name that she is trademarked because she just tied Ultimo Dragon's record of holding 10 titles concurrently, which only lasted for like a week back in the mid-90s. Ultimo Monet would have been a better choice, so they're going with Ultimo Monet. And she also just passed Jade Cargill as the longest reigning TBS champion of all time. And she throws out the challenge here to any champion in the back, not just any woman, any champion in the back to put their title on the line against her TBS title. It's an open challenge. And her saying any other woman back there with a belt kind of gave away that it would be someone from Ring of Honor because, I mean, what do they have? Other random women's champions from other promotions just hanging out backstage? She may have to start fighting the men soon. She's going to run out of belts to challenge for. I was terrified that Statlander was going to put her title on the line right then and there on the spot and drop it to her. Instead, we had Mina Shirakawa come out, the current interim Ring of Honor television champion, because Red Velvet has been out since June, and Tony doesn't want to interrupt her reign by vacating the title, which is exactly what he should have done months ago. Because it's the Ring of Honor television title. Who gives a shit? Like, Athena, I can understand. Athena was said to be banged up, I think, coming out of Forbidden Door. She may be hurt. That's why we haven't seen her. She hasn't wrestled, I think, since the end of August. Otherwise, this would have been a great spot for her to come in and take the title from Mercedes. Right? I mean, I know. But we can imagine, right? But she's been Ring of Honor Women's World Champion for over 1,000 days. I can understand if she ever got seriously injured, you would have an interim champion. Fine. But seriously, why the fuck do they need an interim television champion in Ring of Honor? And so that's what she was fighting for here. She's getting into interim belts now. And the crowd was kind of meh for this, but it kicked up late in the match when Mina kicked out of a Monet Maker. She went for another one, and Mina avoided it. Mercedes got a backslide, and she got a foot on the bottom rope to steal it and win her 11th title. She is collecting these things like Infinity Stones. So she wins an interim title from their sister promotion, a TV title, an interim TV title, an interim TV title for a promotion with no actual TV deal. So she gets the confetti celebration. Statlander comes back out. She avoids a right hand. She drops Monet with a Samoan drop. And the new champion scurries away. And then later on backstage, Mercedes issues the challenge for Full Gear. It'll be Mercedes Moné against Chris Statlander for the AEW Women's World Championship. So there it is. And it's very easy to think that that's going to go the way that all of her other matches go. Except she already challenged for the world title once before, and she lost to Toni Storm. If they put the world title on Mercedes at Full Gear, before she starts dropping all of her other belts that she has, I don't see why Tony Khan would allow his world champion to go around to all of these other promotions losing match after match after match. Like, you do that first. Then you win the world title. After this woman has hit rock bottom. That's what this needs to be. Now, what it needs to be and what it will be may be two completely different things. But it's the only way to make the Monet character the least bit interesting at this point. She needs that downward spiral. She already beat Statlander at Full Gear last year. And then she beat her again at World's End. Chris is 0 for 2 against this woman. Having her go 0 for 3 would be a colossal creative failure. Colossal. And the TBS title does not need to be added to that match either. She loses, and then she begins her descent from that point forward. And once she's beltless, that's when you build her back up for another run at the world title. Meanwhile, in the back later, Renee approached Toni Storm, who was sitting in the corner almost catatonic after her loss, when she was joined by an equally distraught Mina Shirakawa. And Toni said they lost everything. And Mina gave her a hug, tears in her eyes, and said, "No, we still have each other." There are your first AEW Women's Tag Team Champions right there, in case you're wondering. In case you're wondering where Toni Storm goes from here, that's where she goes. Brody King and Bandito, they retain their AEW Tag Team titles over Kazuchika Okada and the brand new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion Konosuke Takeshita. He beat Zack Sabre Jr. for the title this past week at the King of Pro Wrestling show. That's 3 different titles this man has held this year. The IWGP title, the Never Openweight title, and the AEW International title. Plus, he won his first G1 Climax. And before this year is over, he may well win the Continental title as well. Hell of a year for that man, and well-deserved. You also can't well pin him right now, so the biggest surprise for me was seeing Okada take the pinfall loss for the Callis family in this one. But it was the only move to make if they were losing this match. It had to be Okada. But this was a great fucking match. It suffered from the same problem as the Fletcher and Briscoe match, where they did not need that much time. This got almost half an hour. And they still had the 2 main events left to go. But this was my favorite match of the night. King and Bandito, they do this thing now where they break out into a little Macarena dance in the middle of the ring during their matches. But Okada cut it off here. And we got Okada doing a middle finger Macarena, which was just amazing. He's just such an asshole. Late in the match, Takeshita ate an accidental Rainmaker from Okada, who had the biggest grin on his face after clobbering his partner. You had Bandito with one good arm trying for the 21 plex, not able to get it. But there's Brody King. He's encouraging his partner. He's cheering him on. You can do it. You can do it. And he did it. He had a one-arm 21 plex, and he pinned the Continental Champion to retain the tag team titles in a hell of a match. And they announced that Okada will now defend his Continental title this Wednesday on Dynamite against Bandito. They're not even waiting for Full Gear to do it. And I think that may be because we are getting Okada against Takeshita at the next pay-per-view. I think they may do that first match there. I think they may have Takeshita lose, only to come back in the Continental Classic and work his way to the finals for a rematch with Okada, and he wins the title there. I think that may be the play. Because otherwise, why not do a match like Okada against Bandito, who, by the way, is also the Ring of Honor World Champion? Why not save that for the next pay-per-view? Unless you've got a bigger match that you plan to go to on that show. Hangman Adam Page retained his AEW World Championship over Samoa Joe in the co-main. I figured they weren't closing with this. And why would they? Darby and Mox is the match with the long-term story here. That, and they wanted the happy ending. And there was no happy ending here for Hangman, even though he retained his title. I thought it was a good defense for him. I wouldn't call it a great match. It was a good match with Hangman nearly going out in the Coquina clutch, but he came back to life. He avoided a muscle buster attempt, and he finished Joe off with 3 buckshot lariats. Who does he think he is, Cody Rhodes? Only Cody hits his finish 3 times to finish somebody off. And then they shot an angle, a big angle after the match where the Ops came out. And it looked like Joe was paying respect to Hangman in defeat, and then he levels Hangman with a clothesline. And then Hobbs and Shibata, they put the boots to Hangman Page. So it wasn't a Samoa Joe heel turn, it was a turn for the entire group. And Joe tells Hangman that he's not worthy of being the champion. He blasts him in the head with the belt, and then he puts Page down with a muscle buster onto the belt. So that was unexpected. The Ops spent months backing up Hangman against the Death Riders only to turn on him. The Ops are like wrestling fans, turning on their favorite wrestler after the struggle is over and they finally win the big one. They're as fickle as the fans are. But now they get another match out of it with Joe and Hangman, and it just buys time until MJF is ready to come back, because all roads lead to World's End as far as I'm concerned. The same show where MJF lost his Triple B 2 years ago is going to be the same show where he wins it back. And they closed. with the I Quit match between Jon Moxley and Darby Allin. The real main event that Tony wanted all along for Darby to win the title, but Darby wanted to go play Mountaineer, so there was no title on the line here. You know, with all the use of fire by Darby leading up to this, I thought they were going to make this match an Inferno match. And I was surprised when they made it an I Quit match instead. And if you saw their coffin match back at All Out, you had to be expecting a really bloody, really violent affair. And even though we got crowd chants of "this is fucked up" during this match, okay, that may be the first time I've ever heard wrestling fans actually chant "this is fucked up" for something in a match. Even with that, this still was not nearly as violent as I feared that it was going to be, or bloody. And the reason for that, I imagine, had to do with them being in St. Louis. And Missouri has a state athletic commission that does not allow for a lot of things, like cutting people open and suffocating them, and all the things that Jon Moxley and Darby Allin love to do to each other. It's written in the bylaws. It's not allowed. It's not permitted. Although we did see Jon Moxley try to drown Darby inside of a fish tank. Apparently that was permissible, but the other stuff we didn't see, I would imagine it's because they were not allowed to do so. I actually think them toning things down a bit from the bloodbath that I was expecting made for a better match. Which is not to say that we didn't get some sick shit in this match. Moxley took a bamboo skewer at one point, and he drove it underneath Darby's fingernail, which is something I did not need to see. Darby would not quit. Darby choked him out over the top rope with the AEW flag that he brought with him to the top of Mount Everest, and Moxley started to panic just like he did when Hangman did the same thing to him at All In, except he had a chain around his neck. But Moxley was able to gouge his way out of it this time. We had Darby spraying lighter fluid all over Moxley. Wheeler Yuta and Daniel Garcia, they sprint out. They got sprayed in the eyes. I mean, those two were just completely useless. There was a brutal paradigm shift by Moxley through a chair. Claudio and Pac, they were out there. Claudio gorilla pressed Darby over his head and got a running start and tossed him out of the ring and onto the announce desk, and Darby bounced. He bounced off of it like a ball. And then Moxley hit a paradigm shift off the apron through two tables that were outside right next to each other. I mean, I'm saying this was violent, but still not as violent as I thought these two might take things. And then we had a first. They brought a fish tank into the ring. And they were not looking to feed the fishies. They brought it into the ring. They filled it up with water. And Moxley placed Darby's head in the tank. Multiple times he submerged this man, trying to drown him. More attempted murder on these shows. Trying to get Darby to quit, but he would not quit. Until the lights went out. When the lights came back on, who was in the ring but Sting? Old man Sting. In his bomber jacket with the white goatee and the white hair and the white face paint. And he's standing behind Moxley with a baseball bat. It should have been white to complete the look. He used the bat to send the other members of the Death Riders to the floor, and then he choked Moxley with it before tossing the bat to his son. And as Sting was leaving, Marina Shafir got in his face, so he picked her up over his shoulder and carried her to the back. Darby hit Moxley with the bat in the ribs. He hit him with the bat in the knees, and he smashed the aquarium. So there were pieces of glass everywhere. There was a giant puddle now in the middle of the ring. As Darby wraps the AEW flag around Moxley's throat, he hits a scorpion death drop. He follows that with a coffin drop. And then he applies a scorpion deathlock in the center of the ring in the giant glass puddle. And Jon Moxley quits. And if it felt like an anticlimactic way for Moxley to quit and for the match to end, it did. It did feel that way a little bit. I imagine the idea, though, is that without the Death Riders there to help him, Jon Moxley is a coward, right? He talks a big talk, but he can't back it up without help. How many times did he retain that title with help from the Death Riders when he was champion? Right? A couple of baseball shots to the kneecaps and a leg lock is all it took with no one there to help him for Jon Moxley to show his true colors and who he really is, right? He's all talk. This should be the beginning of the end of the Death Riders. I know I said that after All In. I'm saying it again now. I thought it would be coming out of that match. But now, he's lost to Hangman. He's lost to Darby. I see no reason why these men would stand behind this guy and do whatever he says. I mean, they should all beat the shit out of him on Wednesday. But Tony Khan may not want the comparisons to the Vision angle that WWE just did on Monday and all the tweets that would follow of him copying them, so maybe he won't do it. But that's what he should do. That's what needs to happen. The entire Death Rider's story arc goes back to him winning that title of WrestleDream last year and doing what he did to Bryan Danielson, who interestingly was not there last night. I don't know where he was. But that parting shot of Darby posing with the AEW flag, that was always meant to be the end of this. This needs to be the end. The Death Riders overstayed their welcome a long time ago, but now there is no need for them. But they told a good story between these two, and they didn't need gallons of blood spilled to do it. You know, Moxley tried to break Darby, and Darby bends, but he does not break. And if they were going to bring back Sting, that was the right moment for them to do so. If anything, I think they didn't spend enough time on Darby celebrating and taking it all in, you know, when the match was over, because they ran so fucking long, which is another reason why shaving off 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there would have helped, right? It felt like they rushed off the air because, of course, they did. I think it was 12:30 in the morning. They could have allowed that moment to linger a little bit more, but they had no time left. So it was not my favorite pay-per-view of the year or anything. I thought it was a strong show with the right end to the story in the main event. They had a big angle coming out of the world title match. They had a tag team title match that stole the show. And there wasn't anything egregiously bad outside of the length. You know, I will say, I think they have enough heel factions, though, in this company as it is. Now that the Ops appear to be heels, that's in addition to the Don Callis family and the Death Riders and the Demand. And who am I missing? LFI, right? They're a heel group. Maybe they use this as a way to get Eddie Kingston and Hook involved with the Ops, right? I don't know. We don't need any more heel factions, though, on this show. So on Wednesday, we have Okada against Bandito for the Continental title. We have the Ops defending their trios titles against the Hurt Syndicate. And they are going to reveal the brackets for the Women's Tag Team title tournament.